would involve the restoration of tariffs on steel and aluminium that he brought in and that Biden put on ice. And I think one thing that a lot of people are thinking, like, how does this work? You want to open up a trade war simultaneously with both of your largest trading partners, one of which you say is your biggest strategic rival in the world, China, a country that you may even go to war with at some point. The other of which is your longest standing strategic ally, Europe, and also that is the largest trade and investment relationship between Europe and the United States in the world. Both economies extremely heavily invested in each other. So these are categorically different actors. How do you do that simultaneously, especially when you're thinking about the fact that China is desperate to try to improve relations with Europe, which have been so damaged by its support for Russia in the Ukraine war? Doesn't Trump there risk fueling a conversation in Europe saying, look, the Americans are not our friends. They're opening this trade war with us. They're forcing us into an extremely hostile relationship with China that is no good for us. We need to rethink this whole idea of kind of joining forces with the United States against China, and potentially bringing about a rebalancing of Europe's relationship with China. Yeah. So this could be a potential knock-on effect. And if you start to think these things even further along, I mean, I was in a conversation actually with a Chinese expert the other day, and also many American experts on this issue. But if you think about it, it's fairly mind-boggling, and we're all going to take time to kind of digest this. But if you have a situation like that between the United States, so the United States increasing its hostility towards China and increasing hostility towards Europe, potentially, creating at least a motivation and a potential argument for the Europeans to think, okay, let's try to patch things up with China a bit. At the same time as Donald Trump is trying to improve relations with Vladimir Putin in Russia, you have this very bizarre sort of new set of drivers in these major relationships between these major powers. So yeah, and so I think these are some of the potential things that could get whipped up if Trump really goes all in on this trade war, multi-directional trade war that he's been threatening. So I guess one of the questions is, okay, does he really go in all at once, or are we going to see a sort of a phased approach to this bit by bit? So time will tell on that. But yeah, it has huge and fascinating and uncertain implications.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. I think in the chat there are some interesting questions or comments that are being made.
There are. One thing is that people want Melissa to know that they remember you from your last episode where you were talking about electrical vehicles.
Oh, yes.
Hi, guys. Yeah, I'm back.
And there are two other issues that have been addressed, and people have asked a lot of questions, but unfortunately we haven't had the time to get to that yet. One is about Trump being a convicted felon. And people want to know, what does that mean? Will he ever be sentenced? What happens to his legal cases? Somebody called Amnesia says, funny to think a person who possesses charges for corruption and such has the vote of an entire nation. Humans are strange. The other thing people want to talk about is just the idea of America's first female president and why that hasn't happened. Some people are wondering, is this the same as Hillary Clinton's time? Why do people not vote for a female president? I don't know if it's too simplistic to sort of...
Well, she did win the popular vote. So I mean, we can't say that America is a country that doesn't want a woman as president. I mean, I think you could say Americans did, but the Electoral College made that impossible in 2016, but America's ready for that. But
let's talk then. Let's pick up on about women, because that's something you've been looking at yourself today, haven't you?
Well, this is. I think there's going to be a lot of questions that will remain unsettled. Even, I mean, people still debate about exactly why Hillary Clinton lost the presidential election. So I think it's a very difficult conversation to have because we can never get into the brain of somebody in the ballot box when they choose a candidate. And what I'm a little concerned about is that people think that it is because Kamala Harris was a woman definitively that she lost. But as we have been discussing all these various issues, it could have been some of the issues that they felt she wasn't going to be strong enough on. I absolutely, of course, feel that gender does play a role, but it might not play as large a role as we think. Having said that, in my gut, and this is not based on anything, but I do think that when America does elect a female president, it is not going to be a Democrat. The first one will be a Republican. Sort of in that Margaret Thatcher sort of mind.
Will it be a MAGA Republican? I mean, is that where we're headed? Because we could also ask, what condition is the GOP and the Democratic Party in today?
Well, I mean, one can argue that if Nikki Haley was running against Kamala Harris, that actually the sweep from the Republicans today would even be bigger and wider.
That's a good point. That's a very good point, yeah.
And just talking then about Kamala Harris, many people were expecting women to do it for her, to get her over the line. Did that not happen?
That is something that people are trying to figure out right now, because going into the election day, the feeling was that suburban women were going to turn out and vote for Harris. In fact, they were leading compared to Trump by double digits. And now what the earliest exit polls are saying in the last 24 hours is something conflicting, which is that women did not turn out for Harris as much as they did for Biden or Hillary Clinton in 2020 or 2016. So I think we got to figure this out. What's actually going on?
Despite the issue of abortion, which seemed to be on so many women's minds when you were listening to interviews.
Yeah, and also when you looked at the midterm elections and just how many people turned out in incredibly red states to preserve the right for an abortion. But again, maybe abortion wasn't the biggest issue.
That was my sense for this entire campaign, that the Democrats were putting too much emphasis on the abortion issue and not enough on
the bread and butter.
That's what I think.
Women run households. They control the purse. Yeah. They're seeing the inflation. For better or worse, whether it's fair or not, they're mostly the ones going to the supermarket, buying the eggs, buying the milk, and at the end of the day, they're looking at protecting. And here's the thing, the campaign messaging was your daughters. You have to protect your daughters' rights. But I would posit that there is enough of a fraction of conservative, evangelical, Christian women in the United States, and not just Christian, religious women in the United States who support the patriarchy, because not only do they have daughters, they have sons.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think has not really been explored. And it's very intangible and hard to really report on.
That's right, yeah. But my sense was we heard a lot about Kamala Harris talking about the right to an abortion. And I felt there was a disconnect there between what she was saying and what the majority of the people would want her to be saying. And you have to ask yourself, did she not realize that? Did her advisors not realize that? I mean, for some reason, they thought that this was a winning tactic. This was the issue that you needed to pound on, and it didn't work.
Or maybe it worked. I'm going to play a devil's advocate a little bit. Maybe it did work. Maybe when we look back at this and really have better data than we have right this moment, women did turn out. But Trump was calling for the men to turn out. And maybe the men did turn out.
Yes.
We had people like Joe Rogan. We have people like Elon Musk. He was on all these extremely popular podcasts with the bros.
Yeah, but everyone had said that men weren't going to vote.
Yeah,
that's what we were being told.
Maybe they finally got out of their couches and their beers, which is what people thought. Like the men wouldn't.
Let me just hold on. Let me say. Stand up here for the men. I mean, the only man at the table here. I don't think that we can say that. Just because the men voted, all these men that voted were against the right to an abortion. I mean, I know plenty of men who would say, yes, a woman should have a right. I mean, it's her body. I mean, I would think that most men in our generation would tend to think that. I mean, I may get shot for saying that, but that is how I think we've been raised, to respect a woman and to respect her right to decide about her own body.
But it does seem that more of the young men that Trump was targeting went out and voted.
And maybe it wasn't about, maybe you're both right. It wasn't about abortion, it was about also this concept of masculinity, which is related to abortion, but not entirely, right?
Yeah.
You can support abortion as a male and still feel like you're more attracted to the Elon Musk and Joe Rogans of the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me...
Ask Richard.
we've got
Richard, how do you feel as a man today?
Well, I was nowhere near either a couch or a beer in the last 24 hours.
You wish you had been.
But I think, I mean, just one thing I would add on the issue. Sorry, there's a bit of a noisy trolley going back in the background. But a bit of one issue I pick up on with respect to abortion. It has been interesting to watch Trump trying to soften his profile on this subject during the course of this year, to try to put some distance between him and the Supreme Court decision that was the result of the Supreme Court judges that he picked, which tossed out Roe v. Wade, of course, which led to this whole discussion. And he's been doing that in a few ways. His message has been, all I did was I returned this to the states, and it's up to the states to do things. And we've seen measures taking place in many states, and I'm in favor of this particular. Always stressing that he's in favor of not the most extreme versions. Plus, his wife Melania. Coming out with a book a few weeks ago, a memoir in which she talked about having different views from her husband on this, being pro-choice quite clearly. Donald Trump referred to this in quite a few events, including his closing speech last night, and came across slightly patronizing, actually, saying that, and my wife was she's a New York Times bestseller. Can you believe it? As if that would somehow be incredible. But I think it is quite an important part of their strategy to try to sort of show, look, Trump himself and the people closest to him have this view on it. So they're trying to soften that whole image. And I think that was designed not to necessarily win over Democrats, but it was designed to kind of give more moderate Republican women pause before they think about either not voting or voting for a Democrat on this.
I'm glad you mentioned Melania because we haven't seen much of her, and she just appeared the last couple of days. And, I keep having this song go through my head when I see her now, and it's a song by the late country singer Tammy Wynette, which is Stand By Your Man. And, talking about masculinity and the patriarchy and the role of men and women. And there's Melania, who, if you believe what the tabloids say, she and Trump are estranged, and she has very little to do with her husband. And yet there she is standing by him and defending him. And it's a question maybe I want to throw out to the women. What does Melania mean to you women?
Oh, wow, there's a question.
Well, I'll be very blunt. First ladies in general mean very little to me. It was not as if they ran for president.
Yeah.
I do think it's amazing that she is still there, and I will say no more. But obviously she is standing by her man.
She is.
She is. But I will pause it there. But listen, there was another interesting question that came out that you mentioned about Trump being a felon. And we haven't actually talked about this, have we?
Yes.
So far, so he's got these four criminal cases against him. So far found guilty of 34 counts of felony. That was really that hush money trial that we had earlier this year, and still has these 3 criminal cases hanging over him, and that includes that federal, the January the 6th case with the Capitol riots. We've got the election case in Georgia back in 2020 when he wanted to find more votes, and we've got the classified documents case. So my main question is, number one, he is already a felon, as we've said, a convicted felon, but what is now going to happen with these other cases once he's back in the White House? Does anyone have an idea? Will he be able to just make them go away?
Kind of. Mm-hmm. For the federal ones, he will pardon himself.
That's right.
And for the state ones, he cannot pardon himself. For the state cases, but they will drag on. And while he is in his role as president, they really can't move forward.
You could also say that this could be a place that needs to be watched for an abuse of power, where you're right. I mean, he doesn't have any authority to intervene in a state case, even as president, but there could be an attempt to do just that. I mean, that would be something to watch. I mean, because we've never done this before. We've never elected a convicted criminal to president. So, yeah, this is uncharted territory.
And yet that didn't seem to make much difference to people who've just voted him in as their next president.
No.
So people just put all that aside then?
Obviously, they did. That's a tough one to wrap your head around.
If I understood the thinking of 50% of the Americans who voted for him and understood that he was also a convicted felon, I think we would have a better idea of an expectation that he was going to win. In other words, there's an electorate that's really hard to understand.
Yeah, it doesn't stick. I mean, it just does not matter to some people. And they would tell you that they think it's all politically motivated anyway, so that they don't think that a crime really was committed. But that also says that they think that the justice system is corrupt, right? I mean, and so...
And maybe he'll be after the Justice Department then, possibly.
He's promised to.
I mean, maybe I would just chip in on this as well. I don't know if you guys can hear, but...
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I talked to, obviously, a lot of Republicans last night in Miami, and this came up, and they just see this absolutely as having been politically motivated, and saying, you know, they tried to hit him with everything, and he kind of stands up again. So it kind of, for his strongest supporters, it feeds into the legend, you know, as somebody who can fight off all comers. And I think for people more, I mean, he's obviously done well with independents in this election. The fact that he's got over 50%, so he's expanded his vote this time. And I think for a lot of the independents, it may not be as strident as that, but it would be a suspicion that, you know, partly that, you know, some of this is politically motivated, and partly that, you know, none of these things seem quite so. I mean, everybody knew, for instance, that he was somebody who had had extramarital relationships. And if he tried to cover one up, for instance, you know, this is just what people expect from him. Everybody says he's no saint. And as for the politicization of justice, well, you know, a lot of judicial officials are elected in the US. I mean, that's a simple fact, right. You know, and other systems, you know, have a greater separation. You know, in the US, it is all a little bit intertwined, and right up to the Supreme Court now. You know, you see how the ideological balance of the Supreme Court has significantly shifted, you know, partly because of the picks that Trump made. And I think this was one of the really kind of cosmic fears about this election result, was what if it ended up like 24 years ago here in Florida, getting kicked all the way up to the Supreme Court, and you have a Supreme Court which is now heavily ideologically weighted, being the decider on this election. And I think a lot of people will be relieved that that didn't happen, but it could happen one of the next elections.
I'd just like to get a view from all of you about what you think Trump's presidency will look like. And what is the first thing, do you think, that he will do, Brent, when he takes over officially in January?
I think it's going to, the very first thing will have something to do with the border. I think he's going to keep his word on that at the first day in office. I don't know if it could be symbolic. Maybe he could fly down to the border and take a shovel and start, you know, where Richard showed the image of the wall that stopped. He may go there, and I could imagine him going there and taking a shovel and saying, we're going to start right back where they stopped it 4 years ago. I could imagine that. But let's keep in mind, it looks like the Republicans have taken the Senate. And the Senate approves all, like, ambassador positions, anything with foreign policy. And so we will be talking a lot about Trump's foreign policy the next 4 years, because he now has the apparatus in Washington, in Congress, to give him the green light for what he wants to do.
Melissa?
I agree with Brent. I can keep it simple and say it's the same thing. It's the border. What I will be looking at over the next few years, what I think will be consequential that everyone should be paying attention to, and what I think we'll be discussing a lot on News Desk is the foreign policy. Some people even say that we're already kind of in a World War III. What is this if not an international conflict when you have North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia against Ukraine? What is this when you have the United States involved in supporting the Israeli military in a conflict with its northern neighbors, Lebanon and Hezbollah, and also the fighting against Hamas in Gaza and also against Israel? What is this if we don't have a hot conflict yet, but look to the Indo-Pacific, not just on Taiwan, but look to what is happening between the Chinese and the Philippines in the South China Sea? It won't take that much before you have 3 global fronts. Wow. What is it if not a third world war? And we might have Trump as the leader of the United States having to navigate that. Can he navigate that? That's going to be the big question for me.
Wow, that is something to throw in at the end.
Thanks for cheering us up there.
Richard, what do you think is going to be the first thing that he will do? Do you think it's also looking at this border wall, or do you think something else?
Yeah, well, I would 100% agree with what Brent and Melissa both said. I think that's exactly the kind of sort of splashy symbolism. I mean, if Donald Trump can go and serve a burger or can drive a garbage truck, then he can go down to the wall and shovel some earth with our rancher there, Jim Chilton. Right. So we'll be watching out for that. And I agree with Melissa, that we're entering or perhaps moving deeper into, this sort of sense of a global, multi-faceted and multi-level conflict. How he pursues that will be interesting. A couple of things I would add. So military spending in the United States. Virtually every think tank event you go to here, back in Washington, D.C., people in the defense realm say the U.S. needs to be spending more on defense. It's roughly 3% of GDP right now. That is, they are saying, not nearly enough for that threat environment that Melissa just so well described. But neither Trump nor Harris ran on a platform of increasing defense spending. There is not a political majority in Congress. There is not a sort of societal majority for spending large amounts more on the military. So this raises the question, what happens? How do they deal with that? There are a few potential options. The Elon Musk program about cutting expenditure elsewhere is partly about, oh, look, my iPhone is doing funny thumb gestures. I should stop doing thumb gestures here. Is a cutting program partly about finding space to increase military spending? One analyst I spoke to said they're going to have to slash the size of the army and put all of that money into equipment, that they need a lot more equipment. What happens with nuclear weapons? So there's a growing consensus in Washington, D.C. that because you start to have to think about the Russia plus China as nuclear threats to the United States. Does the United States need to have the same number of nuclear weapons as Russia and China combined, rather than roughly comparable to just Russia? How can you find any arms control mechanism for trying to limit those numbers where you have 3 players instead of 2 players like you had in the Cold War? Does the United States need to start nuclear testing? Robert O'Brien, the former U.S. National Security Advisor under Trump, argued for a resumption of nuclear testing. Project 2025 talks about creating the circumstances for resumption of nuclear testing. If that happens, then the Russians test again, the Chinese test again, the Indians test again, the Pakistanis test again. You could have other countries coming into the nuclear club too. So an awful lot of stuff there. And final thing I would add is that, we need to watch for who is Trump going to try to recruit into his administration. For some of the more provocative names there, that depends on can he get them through Senate confirmation. I think the one name that I would mention that would send chills down spines in Germany is Rick Grenell, who was the former U.S. ambassador to Germany. he made a name for himself with a very kind of antagonistic relationship with the German government. He's thought to have a strong interest in being Secretary of State under Donald Trump. He was the one former official of Trump who was visible in the background when Trump met Zelensky recently in New York. And if the Republicans end up with a very strong position in the Senate, 53, 54 seats, I'll admit I'm not completely up to date on the Senate picture, then, we could be reckoning with a Secretary of State, Rick Grenell, which would be a lot for Germany to handle. Putting a few things out there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. Thank you for your time. Thank you for getting up for us and coming down to sit in your hotel lobby and to really bring us up to speed with everything that's been happening over in the United States, but also with all your analysis of where you think it's all going, which doesn't sound so good to end on, but thank you very much, Richard. I appreciate it. Before we go any further, we had a poll, didn't we?
Yes, we do.
Do you want to just...
And we've received more responses than we've ever had. So we had about 7,200 people voting in the poll. The question was, will a Donald Trump presidency be good for your country? And 43% of the people say yes, 35% say no, 21% say it's too early to say.
Wow, very interesting.
So, wow, I mean, it's not an official poll. It's not a proper sample size,
but it's smart people.
Yes,
right?
It's our smart viewers on News
Very
Desk.
smart.
Guys.
And also lots of comments as well that we haven't got to.
A lot of comments. We didn't get to all of them, but...
we can't go on forever as much as we'd like to. We haven't spoken about so many things. We didn't really talk about Germany or or Europe or NATO. We haven't talked about who else Trump might have on his team.
There were questions about the South China Sea as well that we didn't.
Okay,
Robert.
So lots of things we didn't get to, but we did as much as we could. And I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Brent Goff, who's been with us throughout and who did get up also early as in you went to bed very late.
I went to bed.
And then got up.
I went to bed. I saw her coming in when I was leaving to go to bed, right?
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for not falling asleep.
No, I'm
on
good.
us.
This was a great discussion.
It was a
Yeah,
good
thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. And very much thanks to Melissa Chan as well, who's been doing other things on the side. So thank you. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Next week, check out the community tab on our YouTube channel to see the topic for next week.
Yeah.
We release it 24 hours before the stream actually begins.
Yeah. Many, many thanks for being with us. It's been great, a great discussion, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
For more peace and prosperity. Again, we're here back with Daniela Schwarzer from the Bertelsmann Foundation, still with me here in the studio. And Daniela, one more time about Europe's leaders. Do you believe that they're going to be able to work with a second Trump administration without much rancor?
I think they will try, at least. And I think the most important thing at this moment is to really make clear what the shared interests are and what America has in a stable Europe. Right now, U.S. security also depends on Europe performing well in the alliance. And it's right what Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, just said. Europe will have to increase its contribution to NATO. And I would think that the first step should be to make it clear to the new US president, once he is in office, what his interest should be to work with Europeans and how Europe is shaping up in a better way in the transatlantic alliance.
And again, on trade, there's fear that Trump could reignite a transatlantic trade war. He's even called again the EU a mini China. What do you see the future there?
Well, I think there will be more tensions. He will try to rebalance the US trade deficit. He will look at domestic prosperity and care much less about a rules-based and a kind of an equally equal treatment in trade relationships, he has already asked European companies who want to sell their products in the US market to bring production and thus workplaces to the US. And I'm sure there will be more of that. That will be problematic for Europe. But I don't think there's any close scenario where Europe would decide to turn its back on the US, because it needs market access, it needs this economic relationship and the security and defense relationship. But I also think that the US, you know, if from a Washingtonian perspective, you thought US security and defense without Europe, I don't think that would be beneficial. So I hope a deal can be made where Europe contributes more and the US sticks to NATO with its guarantees of security and in particular its deterrence towards Russia.
Daniela, stay with us. Back to you in a moment. We should mention Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky was quick to post his congratulations on X. I appreciate President Trump's commitment to the peace through strength approach in global affairs. This is exactly the principle that can practically bring just peace in Ukraine closer. I'm hopeful that we will put it into action together. We look forward to an era of a strong United States of America under President Trump's decisive leadership. We rely on continued strong bipartisan support for Ukraine in the United States. Again, political analyst Daniela Schwarzer from the Bertelsmann Foundation is still with me here in the studio. Daniela, Trump has already raised questions over Europe, the United States contributions to Ukraine's defense efforts. Do you see Europe filling the gap if the U.S. withdraws its financial support?
Well, at least it will try to. And in Berlin, there have already been discussions. Whatever Berlin could do if the US doesn't contribute more than it has currently committed to supporting Ukraine financially and in terms of military support. But of course, Germany already is the largest single contributor after the US. And there's only, you know, a bit more that Germany will be able to do. Other Europeans will have to step up. The UK and France. Emmanuel Macron very often speaks about supporting Ukraine more, but if you look at the actual numbers, I'm sure France could do a little more. So I think all Europeans have to make this a collective effort. And also, you know, if Trump moves ahead and wants to negotiate some kind of settlement to the conflict, the hope is, of course, that the US would play a role in stabilizing this and helping Ukraine back on a path towards stability and peace.
How do you see a second Trump term impacting NATO and cooperation on security policy between the U.S. and Europe?
Well, during his first term, Trump was very critical of NATO, and then he never left the alliance, right? So right now, I think we will see a similar pattern that he will criticize, in particular the European allies within NATO, that they should do more for collective defense, that they need to step up their spending and need to find smarter ways to spend, because right now defense budgets accumulated across all European NATO members aren't low in total. But if money is spent in national logics, you don't reap the full benefits of the actual money spent. So cooperation, joint spending, joint armament projects, interoperability of the armed forces, all those are goals that Europe also has to pursue. And then, you know, explain to the Americans that this alliance is more balanced than it used to be and in the mutual interest of both sides, which will mean that Europe needs to get more engaged on Asia, which is the, you know, the primary security concern for the US going forward.
Daniela, a very big question this hour among all the other ones. Do you see Vladimir Putin, of course, the leader in Russia, being more emboldened during a second Trump presidency?
Well, it really depends how Trump approaches him. He has this way of personal diplomacy where he goes and you know, tries to make other leaders his friends, and then he tries to strike a deal. We'll see how this works out with Vladimir Putin, who, of course, is a very strong character and has his own strategy and won't be easily tricked into some kind of deal which is not totally in his interest. But will he be emboldened? I think that really depends on the first positions that Trump takes. If he pulls into doubt the US contribution to NATO and thus weakens its deterrence power, that could then embolden Putin. But this, you know, may not happen because he understands, in my view, that this alliance has a purpose and that if he wants to bring peace to Europe, there has to be a kind of scenario where Russia is not emboldened, because otherwise Vladimir Putin would just go on with his war.
Our thanks to Daniela Schwartzer, political analyst at the Bertelsmann Foundation. Many, many thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a remarkable comeback for Trump, retaking the White House 4 years after losing the presidency in 2020. This time, he becomes America's president-elect as a convicted felon with far-reaching plans for America and the world.
Donald Trump's first term in office ended in acrimony. His departure marred by claims of a stolen election and allegations that he stirred up an insurrection.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
The violence that followed as rioters rampaged through the US Capitol still divides America and sits at the heart of a federal case against Trump, who stands accused of illegally trying to overthrow the 2020 election result. One of 4 criminal cases still hanging over America's new president-elect as he heads back into the White House.
Particularly in the 2 federal cases, the idea would be that he would immediately, and he's announced that he would take action immediately upon being returned to the office of the president. So in January 2025, dismiss the special prosecutor, particularly in the January 6th case, so Jack Smith, basically make these cases null and void, make them go away.
Trump has threatened to use the military against his political opponents, those he calls the enemy within, but claims he'll be a dictator only on day 1 of his second presidency, dismissing allegations from critics that he'll be an authoritarian American leader.
So you say, he's Hitler. And then they say, he's a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. I'm the opposite of a Nazi. I don't know.
On the foreign front, he's vowed to build a lasting peace in the Middle East, describing himself as Israel's protector, and has even boasted of being able to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours.
We have a very good relationship, and I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin, and I think if we win, I think we're going to get it resolved very quickly.
While back at home, he's repeatedly told his supporters that he'll bring down prices and oversee a new economic boom in America, slashing taxes and energy costs and slapping huge tariffs on foreign imports.
We will rapidly defeat inflation, and we will very simply make America affordable again. We're going to make it affordable.
And when it comes to the southern border with Mexico and the issue of immigration, he's pledged to finish his wall and do this.
Immediately upon taking the oath of office, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history. We'll get them out.
And then there's some unfinished business for Trump from his last term in office, something known as Schedule F.
What a Donald Trump administration in its second incarnation would like to do is to really change into the depth of almost all American administrative organizations, the functionality of it, the functionality of American bureaucratic expertise, and to fill that with ideologues. Why? Because in the first Trump administration, he felt and his advisors felt that a number of the policy initiatives and decisions he took weren't executed with the speed and acuity that he would have wanted.
And that brings us to Project 2025, a 900-page manifesto from the US conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, headlined by its authors, some of whom used to work for Trump, as a blueprint for the next Republican president. It's been described by critics as a threat to democracy. And Donald Trump and his campaign have repeatedly tried to distance themselves from it.
I don't know what the hell it is. It's Project 25. He's involved in Project... And then they read some of the things, and they are extreme. I mean, they're seriously extreme. But I don't know anything about it.
But despite the denials, there appears to be overlap between Trump's official plans and the radical policy wish list. In it are proposals for mass deportations and the overhaul of the Justice Department, as well as the rollback of LGBTQ rights and climate legislation. The Democrats claim Trump will implement the ultra-conservative plan as president. We'll find out if he does after he's sworn in come January.
The election result leaves the Democrats and Kamala Harris searching for answers. Data suggests Donald Trump made gains with nearly every demographic group compared with his 2020 defeat, including 3 key ones that have previously been the bedrock of the Democratic Party. That's Black, Hispanic, and young voters. Let's start with the young voters. According to the Associated Press, in 2020, about 6 out of 10 voted for Biden. That support for Democrats went down. Harris got about half the youth vote. It's a similar picture when you look back at black voters. 9 in 10 black voters cast their ballot for the Democrats in 2020. With Kamala Harris as the candidate, that number went down to 8 in 10. Finally, Hispanic voters. In 2020, the Democrats got 6 out of 10 of their votes. This time, 5 out of 10 voted for Harris. William Glucroft is a U.S. analyst and deputy editor for Parliament magazine. He joins me now from Brussels. Welcome, William. What do you make of this data?
What I make of it is that it's quite reductionist. And for as long as Democrats and pollsters and media organizations are going to keep running with these questions of the black voter, the Latino voter, the young voter, and not dig into some more nuance there, about socioeconomics, class, education, a number of things that transcend these groups, right? What is a black voter? Well, black voters are like all voters. They come from a variety of walks of life. Latino voters, Cubans vote differently than Puerto Ricans, vote differently than Mexican Americans, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on. So it's not enough to just say, well, we have the black vote with us. What does that mean? And to that point, we see exactly that, yes, overall, Black Americans are still voting heavily for Democrats, but less so. And in these elections that are so close, all Trump had to do, and we've seen Trump having a long history with this, is just chip away a couple percentage points here and there of women, of people from various Latino backgrounds, of people from various Black community backgrounds to get to the result that we saw today.
Let's dig in deeper with this. I mean, the math is pretty easy, and there's a trend here. We're talking a loss of roughly 10 percentage points from almost every traditionally Democratic voting bloc. Keeping in mind the nuance that you just referenced there, how did that happen?
I mean, Trump has been saying this was what was going to happen, and he was right. And we have seen this trend towards a more nuanced electorate, that these traditional ethnic groups and only viewing people as their ethnicity or their skin color and not bringing in, as I said, education, class, these kinds of things, is a big liability for Democrats. They are going to need to really rethink, what does diversity look like in America? Because they've always gone on this assumption that Democrats can win because the United States is getting more diverse. But exactly to their point, Democrats also want to see that diversity do well socioeconomically. And as people do better socioeconomically, they might have changed their voting habits and vice versa. So Democrats really have to rethink what exactly these various demographic groups are, what they want, because it's a bit reductionist, if not a bit offensive and patronizing, to say just because you are of a certain background or of a certain community, you will automatically think a certain way. There's a much more nuanced sort of political approach that the parties have to go after that Donald Trump clearly was very successful at.
William, how do you explain that this was such a clear, undisputed victory for Trump, despite everyone expecting a drawn-out neck-and-neck race where the outcome might not be clear for days?
All right, well, everyone except the Trump people, of course, we should probably note. I mean, there's a couple things at play here. Obviously, pollsters have acknowledged, first of all, polls are more of an art than a science. Pollsters have acknowledged it can be extremely difficult to get an accurate reading and an accurate weighting of Trump voters, of low propensity voters. We've heard this term low propensity for months now, people who don't tend to come out to vote, that Trump has been very good at getting out to vote, very hard to poll those people. And also, polls have a margin of error, and that can span 6, 7, 8 points on either side. So that helps explain that. Also, let's keep in mind that in 2020, Joe Biden, although he won, he didn't win by the margins that many of the polls in 2020 were saying. And so Kamala Harris was going to have that much of an uphill battle to get to where she needed to go, and she didn't get there.
You just talked about low propensity voters, but there's another interesting figure that might help explain Trump's success, his support among first-time voters. It increased from 32% 4 years ago to a majority of 54%. Significant.
Very significant. And I think Democrats and others need to ask themselves, why were people not voting and now they're voting, right? What causes a person to want to come out and vote? Clearly, Trump has tapped into something. And he's been very effective. We've known this, that he's very effective at getting people out to vote who might not ordinarily vote. From a Democratic perspective, almost in a paradoxical Democratic perspective, small d, not big D Democrat, that's a good thing to get more people to vote. So that is something that I think Democrats have to study very, very hard, how to reach in the way that Donald Trump and Republicans have been very successful at to get these people off the proverbial sofa and into the ballot booth and for their interest to be voting for them.
Well, the Democrat in question this election cycle, Kamala Harris, had surely hoped for much more support from white women voters. Anyone tracking her campaign knew abortion was at the center of it. Why wasn't that enough?
She did exactly. She did well with women, of course. She didn't do as well as many expected. She didn't even do as well as Biden did. There are many reasons for that. I think it's too soon to really speculate on what all the nuanced reasons were, because there's always more than one reason. And as I was saying earlier, women are a broad swath of the country, of voters. They're half the population. There's many different reasons that someone might vote one way or another, more than just being a woman or what have you. And it just wasn't enough, right? I said that earlier, as I said, Donald Trump chipped away at all of these groups, at all levels of society, at all corners of society. And regardless of what traction that Kamala Harris might have made, it just wasn't enough.
I'm really curious, in your mind, William, if you had to pinpoint one specific issue, which I know might be impossible, but which issue decided the election for Trump?
Yeah, that is an impossible question. Obviously, exit polls are showing that the economy, despite its macroeconomic strengths, is being felt by many Americans as not working for them. And the fact is, the change candidate tends to win. And the change candidate this time around, and the change candidate for the last decade, has been Donald Trump. 2020 was a bit of an outlier because of COVID. Biden won that largely thanks to COVID, for as macabre as that might sound. And Kamala Harris was not the change candidate. And Americans were saying, we want change. Now, many people might not like the change that Donald Trump is offering, but nonetheless, it is change. And that's what people wanted for a variety of reasons.
Our thanks to William Glucroft in Brussels. As always, William, always nice to hear from you.
Likewise.
And a reminder of our top story. Donald Trump has clinched victory in the U.S. presidential election. Speaking to supporters in Florida, Trump promised what he called a new golden age for America. He went on to say that he had won an unprecedented and powerful mandate to govern. Kamala Harris is expected to address her supporters in the coming hours. And we will end it there. Up next, we take a look at a new recycling plant for electric vehicle batteries. Stay tuned for Eco India. This is DW News from Berlin. You can find lots more news on our website. Just go to dw.com. I'm Michael Loku from me and the rest of the gang here. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.
Eco India. Today, it's super chic. Tomorrow, a huge problem.
It is our fastest growing waste stream.
Billions of tons of clothing are thrown away every year. Fashion labels have pledged to recycle. But what's actually happening? Upcycling for the fashion industry.
Eco India. Next on DW.
Volkswagen is in a deep crisis. With declining profits, pressure to innovate, and fierce competition from China, thousands of jobs are at risk. A change of course is urgently needed. Or is Germany's largest car manufacturer having its Kodak moment? Find out here.
Made in Germany. In 60 minutes on DW. Think big. Or just twice. Think ahead. Or with focus. Think outside the box. Or on your feet. But always remember to think for yourself. We are at your side.
DW News. It was incredibly loud.
This is very difficult. Providing you with free information. DW, made for minds.
Sorry, one sec, let me just finish this. Hello and welcome, I'm Sadhika Tiwari and you're watching Eco India. Most of us do what I just did with that cup. We simply throw things away when we're done using them, be it a cup, an old shirt, or a used battery. But we can do a lot better. Let's find out how. Upcycling is a cool concept, but when we think of upcycled clothing, we don't really think of anything too fancy. So today, let's meet a woman who's turned this notion on its head. She is a fashion designer who's making waste wearable and trendy. In a world where the rag trade generates more than 92 million tons of textile waste each year, ideas like this could really make a difference.
My name is Karishma Shahani Khan and okay, I'm just going to start again. My name is Karishma Shahani Khan and I'm from Pune, India. I'm the founder of label Kasha. We work a lot with Indian textiles and handloom and we do a lot of upcycling and recycling. I was told by someone in my family that you're such an intelligent girl. Why don't you go study philosophy at Oxford or do something big with your life? Why are you studying fashion? You're just a glorified tailor. But fashion for me is way deeper than just the product that we wear on a runway. It really talks about where we're at as a country, as the world, and where we may go to. I would be lying if I said I always wanted to be a fashion designer. I wanted to be so many different things. I wanted to be like an air hostess, a pilot, an archaeologist. I wanted to be a veterinarian, all sorts of things. But somewhere along the way, I had a book, which my father still has with him, where I used to draw clothes from Bollywood and actresses and television and movies. And I would write descriptions of what they were. And that convinced my father that I want to be a fashion designer. I studied at London College of Fashion in the UK. While I was studying there, they were talking about recycling, upcycling, sustainability. So I thought, oh my God, this is so interesting. But then when I heard more about it, I realized that, oh my God, we've always been doing this. You know, what is upcycling? What is recycling? Like at home, my mother would never throw anything out. I thought I can get a bunch of people together and we can just create this beautiful product while not being wasteful, while paying people correctly, while not throwing things into the garbage can. I think the hardest part of starting the business is always just starting it, like being like, I'm gonna just do this. I started from like my dad's balcony, then I moved to my mom's office, one part of it, then we took over a larger part of it, and she threw us out and we took another space. And we had other issues like material, where would the material come from, how would we source everything, how would it come in here, then also hiring people, like how do you find the right person to get on board. Yes, it's not easy being a woman. Yeah, definitely. Luckily, because I do fashion, female in fashion makes complete sense. I mean, everyone assumes that a woman will open a boutique somewhere. So from that point of view, India and women in fashion works. But if you look around you, most of the people who make fashion or the producers of fashion are men. So to sometimes make them trust you and believe you takes a little bit of time, especially when you're like a 22, 23-year-old person, just young, out of college and saying, oh, let's do this. Definitely people look at you in a way where they're like, are you sure you know what you're doing? Or you're just like Papa's little princess who's starting a business. When I actually got pregnant, I was asked that now are we going to shut the label? Is the label going to close because now you're pregnant, so now means how are you going to work so hard? So for me, that was one time when I realized that actually I'm a woman, and once I have a child, people are going to expect different things from me. I think the founding philosophies of Kasha were just about making something that's not going to hurt anyone. We don't say we're sustainable, buy from us. What we are doing is we're saying that let's just be good to each other. Let's not fleece each other. Let's not exploit anybody. Let's make products that are good for our body. Let's make products that, after making it, our waste can also be utilized. And let's make products that last for a long time. When I see people around me thinking and talking about their children's education, like that for me is very, very heartwarming. Or when I see them talking about their wives now going to work, like that makes me realize that we're doing something correct, where they realize that all these things are so important and crucial. I think that if we just stop greenwashing, if we just really just did our job now, and we didn't just use words because they were trends, like now sustainability is a big trend. I feel like that needs to change quite like tomorrow. I mean today evening actually. It needs to change.
While brands like Kasha are changing things up in a great way, it will take a lot more than the efforts of small labels to address the problem of textile waste. Only 1% of the total global textile waste is actually recycled, and this is a huge problem for a huge industry. But there are already solutions that will sooner or later catch the interest of the fashion industry.
Roughly 10% of all global carbon emissions stem from the textile industry. It's also incredibly resource intensive, guzzling up some 90 billion cubic meters of water annually. That's 4% of global freshwater usage, and more than water goes into producing our clothes.
Almost always, these materials go through heavy chemical processes to make them the way they are today, whether it's finishing, whether it's dyeing.
Priyanka Khanna collaborates with brands and producers to foster sustainable innovation in fashion.
Which is why it is mostly, even the natural materials aren't really biodegradable. And it takes sometimes over 200 years for these materials to biodegrade in the industry.
And that's a big problem because we produce a lot of textile waste.
In the US, textile waste has grown 80% since the year 2000.
Rachel Kibbe runs Circular Services Group, which supports industry and government in reaching sustainability goals.
It is our fastest growing waste stream. We send over 30 billion pounds of textiles to landfill every year in the US alone.
Most of our old clothes end up in landfill. What doesn't is frequently burned. Unsold stock and donated old clothing are frequently shipped to the global south for resale, such as here in Accra, Ghana, where 40% of what arrives is actually considered trash. The US sends over 600 million kilos of used clothing abroad every year, largely to the rest of the Americas, while Europe exports over 1.5 billion kilos, much of it to Africa. Often it is dumped, burned, or pollutes oceans and waterways. Textile waste isn't just old, well-worn clothes. It also includes excess stock and the scraps generated during production.
Less than 1% of this material is recycled today, which means all of this is going somewhere.
When we collect clothes, they're primarily going to be sorted for reuse. That's the highest value. Some of those clothes may be downcycled into insulation. Some may be sold as wiper rags. And then a small portion can be mechanically recycled, but mechanical recycling has its limitations.
In 2024, mechanical recycling is the best option we have. Clothes are chopped up and spun into new fibres. It's way better than landfills, but often involves a drop in quality, and it's rare that such materials can be recycled again. But that could soon change. There are a bunch of exciting new recycling companies boasting new technology and hoping to tailor a new future for textile waste. Firstly, there's chemical recycling, where textiles are broken down to the molecular level and then rebuilt into various materials. While some companies only recycle cotton, Australia's Blocktex can recycle blended material, chemically separating synthetic polyester from natural cotton fibres. Polyester is converted into pellets, which can be used for textiles or as materials in construction, while cotton cellulose is turned into clay that has uses in textiles, agriculture, and even packaging. The flexibility is intentional.
I would never want to be beholden for my outtakes just to one brand, because I know how badly those brands can behave.
Adrian Jones co-founded Blocktex in 2018.
We prefer Blocktex to have outtakes that can be useful to many rather than just be useful to one. And I think that's been a real difference for us in the industry. Everybody is preoccupied with making more textiles.
Blocktex recently announced it will expand capacity to 10,000 tonnes a year. Refresh Global in Berlin also emphasises flexibility. Here, bacteria break down and sanitize textile waste, creating 3 raw materials: nanocellulose, ethanol, and sanitized textile pulp. Through Refresh Global's partners, these materials are used to make anything ranging from furniture to bike frames to ethanol-based cosmetics. Refresh Global is a relatively new company and plans to develop a network of smaller facilities that can be developed quickly and flexibly with partners. That's quite different to Sweden's Renewcell. One of the world's biggest chemical textile recyclers, it was among the first to build an industrial-scale textile recycling facility. Here, cotton textiles are shredded into a slurry, separated from contaminants, and dried into sheets of what they call circulose, circular cellulose, which can replace virgin materials like cotton, oil or wood in the production of new high-quality textiles. Going down to the molecular level helps maintain quality, and Renewcell says its cellulose can be recycled 7 times. There are limits though. Renewcell can only recycle waste that's 95% cotton or purer, meaning a lot of what goes to landfill isn't eligible. Renewcell's recycling plant opened in 2022, with capacity to recycle 60,000 tonnes annually and room to expand to 120,000. But in February 2024 came the shock. The company filed for bankruptcy. Just days beforehand, Renewcell told DW they were recycling far below capacity, and fashion brands were hesitant to commit to recycled materials.
We could be producing a lot more.
Trisha Carey is the Chief Commercial Officer at Renewcell.
Many of the brands have goals set for circularity, carbon reduction, traceability, water goals, a variety. So we are a solution to their goals. It's how quickly do they want to be able to achieve those.
Renewcell partnered with Levi's to recycle production waste and include circulose in their products. H&M became a shareholder in 2017, but still the plant didn't make a profit in its first year.
It has been something that has shocked most of us working on sustainability of textiles.
Teresa Dominic researches sustainability management at London's UCL University.
The existing business models in which most fashion brands are nested, they don't really help for initiatives like Renewcell to really be able to make it.
While recycling cuts reliance on water-hungry cotton and oil-based synthetics, it's more expensive. It would take some €7 billion to scale up recycling to hit 20% of textile waste in Europe by 2030.
There isn't enough push from the legislation side to force the industry to actually adopt these materials. So not that the industry should require forcing, but if it's going to be more expensive material, if it's a transition with the thousands of suppliers sitting in Asia, with all the brands sitting this side and across the world, it really is a function of information, so them having access to everything, which is not easily done until legislation usually takes the role.
The EU has mandated that by 2025, member countries begin collecting textile waste separately, just like they do with paper, plastic and glass, which should improve on the 22% of waste that's currently separated. Mirroring proposed legislation in the US, the EU is also mulling a law requiring producers to pay for the processing of their textile waste.
We have to ensure that these laws don't just charge the producers for one portion of that puzzle, like just collection. It has to also facilitate the infrastructure for both reuse and recycling and the innovation around that.
Right now, recycling isn't profitable. State actors could also set the tone by adopting targets themselves.
For us to be successful as a recycler, we have to have committed outtakes. And that's where government and private enterprise has a role to play in saying, government particularly as very large procurers of products.
Meanwhile, Swedish recycler Renewcell has found a buyer. The private equity investor Altor has bought up the company's remaining assets. Altor invests in industries that help to reduce carbon emissions. Textile recycling is one of them. The company is now to be renamed Circulose, like its fibre. But despite the progress in textile recycling, there's still more to be done.
Recycling is still only one part of the problem. Our current consumption patterns cannot continue if we want to move towards a more sustainable industry. There is a huge amount of overproduction in the industry, and whoever's responsible for it, there's a lot of debate around that. Bottom line is that overproduction needs to reduce.
The 100 billion garments we produce each year means 14 for every person in the world. If we can't convince fashion victims to stop buying their body weight in clothing, at least we can ensure that as much as possible of what they purchase is recycled.
Dealing with waste is the same hard-to-crack problem across the globe. Let's head to the southern state of Tamil Nadu to a trash center where garbage is being turned into something very useful, and it is helping new life bloom in a garden, and they aren't just ornamental flowers.
It draws visitors from far and wide. The Nilgiri Mountain Railway is one of India's oldest, passing through the Nilgiri Hills in Tamil Nadu. The town of Kunnur is a major stop on the way. The tourists are very welcome here. In addition to the rolling tea plantations, the holidaymakers are a key source of income. But there are downsides. 16 tons of waste are produced each day by the town's 45,000 residents. Then there's the garbage left by the tourists. More than 10 years ago, in 2013, after the festival of Diwali, I saw a Facebook post written by one of my friends stating that they were going to clean the waste thrown out by the tourists. So I decided to join in. Slowly, many other volunteers joined us too. Then we started to dream about cleaning up the river that runs through Kunnur. And it was while cleaning the river that we started looking for a place to dump the waste. There was no modern landfill site in Kunnur at that time, so the idea of processing the waste was born. The volunteer garbage collectors set up the Clean Kunnur organization. Their aim? To keep the mountains clean for themselves and their visitors. The first step was to separate the garbage into dry and wet waste. The wet garbage is made up mostly of animal and plant waste. We collect all the meat waste in one place inside the wet waste unit. Then it is shifted to a conveyor pallet where the non-organic impurities are removed. After pulverization, it is then mixed with other vegetable and food waste. This mixture then has to dry. During this process, it gets regularly overturned. After 40 days, the dry mass is then shredded and ground. The result is high-quality fertilizer that is bought up by local farmers. The Ooty flower farm is a regular customer. For all these flowers, we need a pH value of 6 to 7 in our fertilizers. And because this fertilizer has that, the flowers grow really well. It's also rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And it contains micronutrients too, and secondary nutrients like magnesium, sulfate, and calcium. All these help the plants to grow well, both in quantity and quality, with top results. The waste life of the plants has also increased. Kunnur now processes 2/3 of its garbage. Wet waste is turned into fertilizer, and 85% of dry waste is recycled. We are successfully managing waste in this small town with a limited number of people, resources, and market. If we can do that here, it would definitely be possible in larger towns that have many advantages over us. In large towns, there are no problems with transport, and there's a lot more garbage. Here, we have to do everything by hand. If larger towns were to manage waste like this, it would also be a great success.
It can be a great success also.
Tourists are again flocking to the town this year, drawn by the famous railway and because Kunnur is a picturesque town, which has got its waste problem under control.
Moving on to e-waste, let's talk about batteries. As EVs or electric vehicles take off, there is one big question. What happens to the used batteries of the rising number of electric cars? Let's head to Germany, where EVs are gaining traction. Recycling batteries can be a complex process, but it can be done. Our reporter checked out a new battery recycling plant in Hamburg.
In the event of an emergency, an electric vehicle battery has to be dropped into water as quickly as possible. When recycling these, the safety requirements are enormous. A warehouse like this one has to be flooded with foam within minutes. EV batteries are extremely flammable or explosive.
Since we opened, we've been on an interesting journey. It was pretty exciting even at the beginning.
The first company to do recycling could make a huge fortune. That's because batteries contain valuable metals like cobalt and nickel.
We expect 15 million electric vehicles on German roads by 2030. 15 million is practically the day after tomorrow, economically speaking.
We're visiting Europe's largest recycling plant for electric vehicle batteries, which opened just a few months ago.
We're standing here on one of the most expensive floors in Germany. Implementing safety first doesn't necessarily mean saving money. The floor is absolutely watertight, several meters thick, and equipped with a sensor that would notify us immediately if any substances were to seep into the ground.
The batteries delivered have issues and have been pulled out in the car factories. However, only a few are still coming here.
Our focus is primarily on testing and implementing new technologies and then using them. We're focused on learning as much as we can to be ready for when the old batteries come out, when the high volume suddenly arrives.
That high volume will arrive when the batteries of the first generation of electric vehicles fail in a few years. Then big business will beckon with the so-called black mass and the metals it contains.
Our goal is to recover 95% of our nickel, which is the most expensive, most valuable ore, including aluminum and copper, of course.
The world is turning to electric vehicles, and the demand for these metals for batteries will grow significantly. By recycling them, manufacturers could reduce the need to source them from mines with poor working conditions.
We are too dependent on raw materials from third countries.
The material from the German recycling plant ends up in a pilot plant in Northern Europe. The battery is shredded and, using a chemical process, turned into what's known as black mass, the black gold of the recycling industry. Among other things, you can extract this green mix of nickel, manganese, and cobalt from it, which is used in this form for new batteries. But is the price right?
It's difficult to give exact prices at the moment because the business is still in development. What's more, world market prices fluctuate greatly. That makes it difficult to calculate.
When operations get ramped up, much of the process will be automated. However, the batteries still need to be improved for high recycling rates.
With car batteries, we can clearly see that the German car manufacturers are now focusing more and more on optimizing product design for recycling. They want to work with us because they are just as interested in raw materials as we are. They also want to close the cycle.
And high recycling rates, such as for aluminum, have another advantage. In the end, they're also good for the climate.
Every ton of aluminum that we can return to the smelters, for example, saves 95% in energy and therefore CO2. These are the real heroes, quasi-raw materials compared to raw materials that we get from the mines.
The operators of the recycling plant have invested millions in what they believe will be a safe bet.
So many better ways to deal with trash. Do you deal with the trash in your homes in any unique ways? Do let us know. You can email us or reach out to me directly on my social media handles. I will see you next week. Until then, take care. Goodbye. Namaskar.
Volkswagen is in a deep crisis. With declining profits, pressure to innovate, and fierce competition from China, thousands of jobs are at risk. A change of course is urgently needed. Or is Germany's largest car manufacturer having its Kodak moment? Find out here.
Made in Germany. In 30 minutes on DW. Yemen in the grip of the Houthi militia. 10 years of civil war, misery and destruction. What do the Houthi want? And what role do they play in the current Middle East conflict? We go on a journey through a country that's torn apart. Close up in 90 minutes on DW.
If you like history, but with a side of culture, travel, and controversy, this one's for you. I'm Rachel Stewart, and I'm hosting a podcast that will put the wow factor back into your everyday life. Every day, we encounter so many things that we don't even notice anymore. They just kind of fade into the background. But if you stop and shine a spotlight on them, what you see might just surprise you. We're going to dig up the dirt on the everyday things around us. Where did they come from? How and why did they evolve over time? And why should we care? Just search for Don't Drink the Milk wherever you listen to podcasts.
Somewhere in the desert.
It costs 50 cents to feed one hungry child for one full day.
50 cents to feed one child a day.
Increíble.
아유, 그러면은 당장 그걸 사야죠.
With the Share the Meal app, you can share your meal with children in need with just 50 cents and a tap on your smartphone. Smartphone users outnumber hungry children by 20 to 1. Imagine the impact you and your friends can have. Together, we can end global hunger. Please download the app.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a special.
Hello and welcome to News Desk. Today there's only one topic the world's talking about, and that, of course, is the US election, with Donald Trump now declared the winner. I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting.
And I'm Nehal Johari. There is plenty for us to talk about today, and we would love for you to send us your comments and questions throughout the stream.
So what was predicted to be a very tightly fought race wasn't. The former US president and convicted felon will be heading back to the White House. Here he is declaring victory even before all states had finished their counts.
We made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy?
So Donald Trump there declaring victory from Florida. And at the moment, Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has yet to concede. Let's just introduce you to who we have around the table, because we've got a whole host of people joining us for this very special and slightly longer news desk. First of all, we have got Brent Goff, somebody that many of you will recognise. He is chief news anchor here at DW News. He hosts The Day, which is a daily current affair programme on DW News. It focuses on the US and also Europe. And actually, Brent, you've been up pretty much all night because you yourself have been hosting the DW election coverage.
Right.
How are you feeling? Awake?
Yeah, well, I think I've got a little bit of adrenaline left in me, but it's starting to go down, I can tell.
Stay with us. We need to feed you with coffee to keep you awake, don't we?
Yeah,
Thank you for being with us.
Well, next to Brent, we have Michaela Kavanagh. She's been on News Desk before, so you might know her from our previous episodes. Michaela will be providing us with some of the very essential context as to where things stand now, and she has access to all of the important election charts and maps that we will need throughout the discussion.
Yeah, that's right. And over to my left, we have Beenish Javid. She is a very experienced reporter for DW News, covering in particular South Asia, so India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, that whole area. You'll be able to give us a bit of a feeling of what's going on there, since we know
that part of the world is
that
watching
part
us,
of the world. Yeah. So thank you also for being with us.
In the chat, you will see Cherry Chan, who many of you know from previous episodes as well. Unfortunately, we couldn't fit her around the table, but she is very much a part of the team and of this show.
And we have to make it very clear that that's not because she's large.
No.
She's definitely not. It's more just we can't fit more chairs around the table. Also, we've got some great guests who will be joining us down the line. We have DW special correspondent Aya Ibrahim. She will be joining us from the US and has been following the campaign there very, very closely. So she, as you can see there, is actually with us from Washington, D.C., right at the heart there of politics. Later in the stream, we will also hopefully be able to go to our DW Chief International Editor, Richard Walker. He is in Florida. And also we will be joined by a News Desk regular that many of you will know, Melissa Chan. She, of course, is an anchor and also has a great expertise, not only in the US, but also covering China. So she will be with us a little bit later. Before that, though, Nihal, you've got some comments that you've already picked up in the chat.
We do, and we do really want your questions and comments to come in throughout the stream so that we can pose them to our guests. We've had some comments coming in under the community post. For instance, several people are congratulating Donald Trump. Someone else wrote, "Dear God, this has me nervous." A third user wrote that this notion of people getting sick of typical politicians and electing someone who is not a politician reverberates with young Americans. A bit strange considering that Donald Trump was the president, so surely he is a politician as well. Yeah. But and a fourth person's asking us, this is an American voter who says, "Isn't the EU a powerhouse on its own? I don't get why our elections matter to them." So that's something we will definitely address later. We will talk about why countries in the EU as well as around the world care about the US election. So please do send us your burning questions, feelings and thoughts, and I will bring them up throughout our chat.
And also we've got a poll.
Oh, right, we do.
We've got it all here on News Desk.
So the poll question for today is, will a Donald Trump presidency be good for your country? You can respond with a yes, no, or too early to say. I'll just repeat the question. Will a Donald Trump presidency be good for your country? Yes, no, or too early to say. You should be able to view the poll on the live chat. Please vote, and we'll get back to the results later.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what those results are. Thanks very much, Nihal. Right, so Donald Trump has won the US election, including some of those key swing states that we've been talking about over the past few weeks in particular. Michaela, now, you can hopefully bring us up to speed with with what it's looking like at the moment.
What it's looking like, yeah, absolutely, Alex. So, okay. I mean, this time yesterday, we were all preparing for a long, drawn-out week of uncertainty, of vote counting, of sort of nail-biting. And, you know, we walk in this morning and things are looking very different. Okay, so bear with me while I have two screens here. So, in just a moment, we'll pull up we use AP as our sort of benchmark for
Associated Press.
Associated Press, that's right, the AP. So I would say, so it was about, you know, we expected, as we said, we expected this long, drawn-out week. Instead, we saw Trump come to a very quick and decisive victory. That started with that sort of relied on swing states. So we've heard a lot about swing states. I think many of us are familiar with them by now, but let's just be clear about what those are. Those are battleground states where it could go either way, Republican or Democrat. And So these swing states are North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Michigan, and Nevada. And so in the hours after the polls closed, we saw almost, like quite quickly, we saw Trump win a victory in North Carolina just about 4 hours or so after the first polls closed. That's here. That was, yeah, so that was 51.1%. And then not long after that, and also just a quick primer on the Electoral College. Electoral College, we have 538 seats and the president needs, any president needs to win 270 of them. So that's where these swing states come into play. These are the ones that really tell us where the support could go. So again, in the hours after, we saw North Carolina, which has 16 Electoral College votes. It's quite a few. And that went to Trump. And then quickly after that, we saw Georgia down here.
And just to interrupt you, Brent, were you on air while any of this was happening, like with North Carolina?
Yeah, North Carolina was the first state that the first swing state that AP called. And that was about 11 p.m. our East Coast time. It was about 5 in the morning here. Yeah. And the thinking had been that if Kamala Harris were able to win Georgia and North Carolina, both of them being swing states, the chances of her then winning were very good, because then usually if you can win those two, you can win Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is the swing state that has to be won. Yeah. And then the signs started, as you were saying, fairly early in the evening that the swing states were tending to be Trump.
Yeah.
And that's what started to happen. In North Carolina was the first to fall, and then after that it was like dominoes.
Yeah. Michaela, sorry,
Right.
just
No, yeah,
just
thank
interesting
you.
because Brent, of course, was on air when this was happening.
Brent was having it all happen live. That's right, and I was asleep, I'm happy to say.
And we were too, I have to add this, we were very careful we waited for AP to call it, because you have to be careful with the votes, because this is counting that's happening in real time. And we know what happened in the last election, we know what happened in 2016, and we also know that we relied on the polls in 2016 and in 2020. Both times they overweighted the opponent to Trump. This time we thought that they had made progress in weighting the possibilities correctly, and again...
Yeah. There was a lot in the margin of error with these polls, wasn't there? Because it was very, very tight.
Yeah.
But then in the end, it wasn't tight.
It wasn't, exactly.
Michaela, do carry on.
Exactly. So then we had North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania earlier this morning. That's 19 Electoral College votes. That took a bit longer to come in, but once it did, it was very clear by that point, I think, that it was looking like a Trump victory. And then what really tipped us over the edge was Wisconsin. Wisconsin is 10 Electoral College votes, which Trump had flipped in 2016, but not in 2020. And Wisconsin is up here.
So if we can just go back to the map.
Do we have the map here? Yeah. Yeah, so that's with 49.7% of the vote in Wisconsin. And that came in, around, midday, I guess, or just a few hours ago.
So it is still, as you can see from those numbers, pretty close, isn't it? 49.7 to Trump, and what was that, 48.8?
48.8% for
Harris.
Harris, exactly. And I mean, we all, in the week leading up, all of those exit polls, or all of those pre-election polls said it's going to be razor tight, it's going to be neck and neck. And, well, it didn't quite work out that way, did it?
Because how it works with the Electoral College is that you, in most states, apart from 2, you've just got to win. You've just got to get over the line, and you've got all those votes, haven't you?
That's right.
And that was all they were. Winner takes all, yeah. Great, thank you very much. Did you have anything else to add? I mean, there's lots to add, isn't there? Maybe we'll be talking about...
Let's come back later. We'll talk about the popular vote. We'll talk about Congress. Exactly, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michaela. OK, let's bring in Aya Ibrahim, who is our special correspondent. She's in Washington, D.C. for us. And Aya, I'd just love to get your reaction to what's happened and what the mood is like over there.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be with you guys. I think it's a debut for me on News Desk, so it's a pleasure to finally at the proverbial big table, even here from...
Yeah, the big table, yeah. I should have said that before, actually. The big table is a Brent Goff term. He invites everyone to the big table.
Because there's always room at the big table.
Because there's always room, although we found actually there wasn't so much room today. Yeah, so I'm sorry you're not with us at the big table, but it is great that we do have you in Washington, D.C.
There's no place I'd rather be, I must say. I mean, I'm right now... normally do our live hits for the TV broadcast for our followers, follow that as well. And as you see behind me, it's quite quiet now, but it wasn't like that up until a few hours ago. Our entire team was here through the night following this this election that we have, we've been reporting the buildup to that election for weeks. And I think, what really stands out to me is something that Michaela said. We were expecting a much longer day today and a much more tense few days. All of the polls were suggesting that any win would be neck and neck, that it would come down to razor-thin margins in these swing states like Michigan, for example, which I'd been following closely because of the Arab American vote. I also report for DW's Arabic service. And that's just not what happened. It really is that Donald Trump was able to be the more convincing candidate for the majority of Americans. And we can go into the reasons why, Kamala Harris did start her campaign much later. Maybe she didn't succeed in distancing herself enough from her boss, Joe Biden, which was an always very tricky balance for her to try and walk. But that's certainly, Trump winning isn't a shock. This isn't 2016, but the extent with which he has won, I think, is something that all of us were pretty much in awe of this morning. And we're just, we're trying to brainstorm how we're going to cover the next few days, the next phase. And so, we'd definitely love to hear from our followers as well, what questions they have for the next phase of this election. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of time between now and inauguration when Donald Trump officially returns to the White House. And that's always a really interesting time, right, with Joe Biden being a lame duck president, so to speak. Yeah. And so that's the big night, I think.
Just let me interrupt you there. Brent, Aya just said there this was not a surprise, this was not 2016. Mm-hmm. But what was your reaction when you started to realise that this was definitely going Trump's way after, as we talked earlier about these polls being too close to call?
I'll tell you, my gut told me one thing, and my mind told me another. My mind told me that Kamala Harris had a good chance of winning. My gut told me that Donald Trump was going to win. And I think there are two reasons that why I've got to learn to listen to my gut. And one was that the polling was not accurate. And we've learned now the hard way in several elections that is the case. And the best example of that is earlier this week, a poll came out from the state of Iowa, which has been a Democrat state before, but has recently been a Republican state. And the poll showed Kamala Harris ahead by several percentage points. Yeah. This was almost incredible. It's hard to believe. And that had us going into last night thinking, okay, Kamala Harris is probably going to win this. Now we know, we've seen the numbers from Iowa, that Donald Trump had a clear victory there. Mm-hmm. So the lesson there is the polls will deceive you if you let them. So you can't rely on the polls. That is something that the polling companies, YouGov, all of them, they have to come to terms with their poor performance. Now 3 U.S. presidential elections in a row. That's one thing. And I think we have to come to terms with that too.
Can I?
Yeah.
Is it just that the performance of the companies is bad, or is it that people are not telling the truth in the polls?
I don't think people are being untruthful. I think that the methodology of taking polls, particularly in the U.S., is now flawed. And it's hard to accept that because there was a time when the possibility of taking polls was, one, easy, and the methodology was also easy and sound. Getting a representative sample in the United States was good when you had an infrastructure of landline telephones and people who answered, which allowed you to know the demographics of the people you were talking to. You could have a representative sample easily. Now, most people have cut the cord. They don't have a landline. They have just their smartphone, their cell phone. And guess what? They don't answer the phone when someone calls and they don't recognize the number.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. I mean, our behavior is so different when it comes to communicating than it was even 10, 15 years ago. And that has made polling very flawed. So there's that. The other point I think that's important for us to take on board is the Democratic Party, and this is not aimed directly at Kamala Harris, this is the apparatus, has shown that it is grossly, grossly disconnected from the reality of the majority of Americans. And when you look at the demographics of the vote as well, this is not an identity politics story that we have been told many times. This is something that spans all groups of Americans. And for some reason, they felt compelled to vote for Donald Trump. And the Democratic Party did not see that. And I think a lot of us in the media also, willfully, unwillfully, also did not see that.
So let's just pick that point up with Aya then. Is that something that you were seeing on the ground?
I think, being here and having been to spoken to Trump supporters, he has managed to attract a very diverse and very broad spectrum of voters. I mean, if you had told me, Trump's first term was known for the so-called Muslim ban, his policies towards Palestine, Israel have certainly, if you look at them on the surface, whether it's moving the Israeli embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights to be under Israeli sovereignty, and a whole host of other policies towards the Middle East, you wouldn't think that he would attract Arab American voters, but he has. I've spoken to Arab American voters who say, we have been ignored by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, Harris is campaigning with Liz Cheney and Republicans and not giving us a platform at the Democratic National Convention. Why should we, in the midst of the unbelievable civilian suffering, many people, many Arab Americans trace their roots, half families in Gaza, half families in Lebanon, and they say, the amount of death that has happened under this administration's watch is just untenable for us to then see that and then go ahead and vote for Kamala Harris. And even though, Donald Trump hasn't had the most, on the surface of it, the most favorable policies towards the Middle East from an Arab American perspective, what they say is at least our people weren't dying. And the Democratic Party hasn't made any effort to reach out to them from their perspective. And that is really fractured. From their perspective, correct. And that has really fractured the Arab American vote, which has historically been reliably Democratic. And obviously the Arab American vote, that's a very small population, but I do use that as an example of exactly what Brent was mentioning there, which is perhaps really a failure on the Democratic Party's side to find the correct messaging to key groups, right? To really make them feel like they are the ones, that they are the ones for them. If we just look at what happened in Michigan just in the week, about 10 days before the election, the Democratic campaign sent former President Bill Clinton, and he stood and he, I'm now paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote, that, Palestinians are dying in Gaza because of, Hamas is using them as a human shield. And then Donald Trump made a visit to Dearborn, Michigan, and said, I will bring you peace. Now, we don't know if he's going to be able to do that. We don't know if he has a plan. But from an Arab American perspective, that is not the messaging that they needed to hear, regardless of where you stand on the conflict, right? I'm just talking about it now from a perspective of Arab American voters that I've been speaking to. And I think there's going to be a kind of come to Jesus moment in the Democratic Party right now about their messaging and how is it that they can readdress, groups that have been reliably on their sides historically, but seem to have felt completely left out during this particular campaign.
Because, Beanish, I was going to say, it's not just obviously Arab Americans, it's Muslim Americans, despite Donald Trump's
and I think what's also very interesting is that Trump realized this weakness of the Democratic Party. And despite all of, like, as I have said, that, his Muslim travel ban and his Islamophobia was, like, I think worse during his era. But despite all of that, he was able to use that vulnerability, and he got some endorsements from some Muslim leaders, and then. And many of the, as Aya also said, that many of the Muslim voters were saying that, yes, we understand that Trump could be bad, because that was the argument that many Democrats were saying, that if Trump comes to power, he could even be worse for the Palestinians, for Middle East. But they were just not buying this argument because...
Well, he could be better. And he's known for being a transactional person, right? You're not his friend unless you've got something to give him. And I think, especially for Arab Americans, they've been subjected to the dogma of the Democrats, which in their mind has brought them nothing. They still see what's happening to the Palestinians. There's no change. And Trump, even if he doesn't say it, the way he maneuvers implies that I will go to Jerusalem, to Israel, and I know how to make a deal, and I will bring this to an end. Because I'm not operating under the parameters of some ideology or dogma. I'm going to go and say, let's make a deal.
Yeah.
And that has appeal.
Yeah. And there is nothing really significantly that Democrats can show to the Arab Americans, to Muslim voters, that any one single step that was convincing, that was strong enough to convince people that Democrats were actually serious in resolving the conflict.
Yeah.
And we're just seeing at the moment pictures on the screen of Donald Trump. That was him making his victory speech in Florida earlier this morning. Actually, as we said before all those key states had actually declared, but it was pretty clear that he was the winner. Of course, it's not just Arab Americans, Muslim Americans that he won over, is it?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up another voter base that has responded a bit differently this year. These are Hispanic voters. They've drifted towards Trump this year. Just a few of the examples are some southern parts of Texas and many parts of Pennsylvania. What happened there? Brent, would you like to?
One of the things interesting is if you look at the polls and ask Latinos, Hispanics, there are many words in America's identity politics soup for describing them. But if you ask them how they identify themselves, the trend is that on the census form, which is taken every 10 years, more and more are saying that they identify as white. And Donald Trump tapped into that. So you could argue that he is exclusionary in his politics, in his let's make America great again. But actually what he has tapped into is a change in demographic self-perception that is inclusive, because the Latinos, as the longer they are in the United States, begin to identify themselves as white Americans. And I know this from my own experience growing up in North Carolina. I have seen that happen. Yeah. And for some reason, he knew to tap into that. And I think that was part of the reason why you saw this shift. And it wasn't just men, it was also women who shifted over to...
Yeah, I was reading, I think white women have voted, majority of the white women have voted for Trump.
That's right.
And that is a bit surprising.
Yeah.
Aya, you're listening. Yeah, sorry, Aya, I just wanted to make sure that you could come in on this discussion because you're obviously there on the ground.
Yeah, the Latino vote, obviously that's also not a monolithic group here in the United States. I mean, that encompasses people that are coming from across Latin America. A colleague of mine, Benjamin Alvarez Gruber, has reported on this extensively. And my impression is that just because somebody has an immigrant background doesn't mean that they are willing to forgive the immigration policies of the Biden-Harris administration. So a big issue there is the southern border. So you'll hear Latinos say, I'm not against migration, but I do not want to see illegal migration. And they see that as a threat to the country that they have made their home. That is something that you hear across the board, right? People are saying we're not against immigration, but the way that the Biden-Harris administration has handled the influx of migrants for whatever we could talk for hours about the migration policies under Biden and Harris, but that is not automatically something that is accepted by people just because they happen to be immigrants.
Yeah,
right.
And let me just pause you. Let me just pause you there a second, because actually we have got a short clip from Donald Trump from this morning where he is specifically talking about the issue of migration and in particular the border. So let's just have a little listen to that.
It's the greatest country and potentially the greatest country in the world by far. And right now we're going to just work very hard to get all of that back. We're going to make it the best it's ever been. We can do that. If we had to wait longer, I don't know. It was going bad, and it was going bad fast. We're going to have to seal up those borders, and we're going to have to let people come into our country. We want people to come back in, but we have to let them come back in, but they have to come in legally. They have to come in legally.
So there we have it. Donald Trump, they're saying we're going to have to seal up those borders, Aya. And he got a huge round of applause, didn't he?
He also said they can come, but they can come legally.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he is. I mean, Aya is exactly right. He is tapping into what immigrants will tell you in the United States, as they will here. I came here legally, and it's not easy. I want everyone to have to go through that process of coming here legally. And it is interesting. If it's close to you, if you're first generation American, it's a very experienced, real, lived thing to know what it's like to cross the border and to come to the United States. And he taps into that.
Yeah. Brent, there are some specific comments coming in for you. Our user Carolina Villena, who is a regular viewer, wanted to thank you. She said she's very happy about your presence.
Oh, thank you.
Your presence. We are in awe.
There are quite a few specific comments coming in for you. And Bartholomew said that that's the thing. Brent, he's agreeing with your comment earlier, and he says, my mother, who is Nicaraguan, considers herself as white. I remember this growing up, and I'm 54 years old. Yeah. I don't, but she does, and this is a phenomenon.
Yeah, it's a phenomenon, right? It's interesting.
And Aya, is that something that you've seen on the ground as well?
It might have been anecdotally here and there, but I would say that the overwhelming sentiment is that of immigrants, who are citizens or are here on a recognized status, whatever that may be, is that, they say, of course, their roots hail from a certain part of the world, but their loyalty is really to the United States, and they want to see that function and work for people that are here. That's something that I heard way more often, I think, than particular identification with white or not. And I think, Donald Trump, when he says that, when he says, I thought his speech at, his victory speech was actually quite balanced, right? Mm-hmm. He didn't attack Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. He didn't go too much into the vitriol. He said I'm paraphrasing, he said he will be a president for all Americans. But also that particular comment about immigration is something that will appeal to a lot of Democrats in that phrasing, right? We want people to come, but we want them to come legally. And so it certainly sets a much, less sharp tone than definitely what we've heard from him on the campaign trail, certainly in the past 2 weeks. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a peaceful presidency. A peaceful and calm presidency. I think we really have to wait and see the decisions that come in. He also said, it would appear that Elon Musk is going to be on the presidential team in some capacity. It's unclear what exactly, but certainly as far as that first speech, it will appeal to a lot of people who are maybe on the fence, voted Democrat, might be disappointed, but will now